Um, well, one question I thought of while watching it, and it's raised in different ways throughout, and of course in your initial discussion of it, I guess it also, like, what is the sort of the nature then of truth telling, shall we say, in each of these? How is the uh, where can we locate it in any piece of medium that we see? Yeah, and where do you think your let's take one step back before that. Let's just talk about the genesis of ownerBuilt is sort of what you convey of it in the film, how you came to it, what other elements were you investigating, what other things were you investigating in your previous work that took you to it?
Um, hmm. Probably the piece that had the biggest impact. I spent a year with this amazing theater group called the Medea Project Theater for Incarcerated Women, and I had this incredible access. I spent a year with them in the county jail as they built a theater piece based on their stories, and there was just the piece was conflicted for me in a lot of ways, because I started questioning what it is that an audience is sort of extracting out of an experience, and what it is that they're extracting out of any documentary experience that they have, and I'm always, even with myself, when I watch work, I'm sort of suspicious of sort of a voyeuristic activity that we bring to things, and just trying to examine the nature of that transaction, what it is that's being exchanged, what it is that the audience thinks that they're walking away with, what it is that they think that they've experienced, and what do they do with that experience. So that piece challenged me in a lot of ways because of that, and I started ownerBuilt, and I wanted to strip away access, and its first incarnation was as an audio work, but nobody would show it as an audio work. I had dreamed of it going to festivals and the lights coming down and just a blank screen, as a way to sort of withhold the image that people use as a way to sort of authenticate an experience. And then that wasn't flying, and the work wasn't getting seen or exhibited, so it dawned on me a way to give an image but to withhold an image was to animate it. So it sort of provides that, people feel that they're seeing, and sight is supposed to be truth, and so the piece sort of moves back and forth tries to anyway, between various levels of rendering, I guess is one way to say it. Yeah.
Just particulars briefly, like how did you come to this animation? What was it reminds me of machinima. So what was the source imagery or for the animation itself, and then where did you find ways to? How did you choose to this approach to it visually then? In the specific.
Work happens in such bizarre ways.
Of course.
And how it gets done. I think that some of it is the performative nature of storytelling. Mm-hmm. And when I grew up, you had to command a stage. You went out into the world, you had experiences, and then you all came back in the evening, and you, like, whoever could capture the group best, in retelling what the dirt that you had done during the day. Being very much aware of that, the telling of stories, and people have stories to share, and they tell them in very, not everybody, but people like to animate stories. So, that started me thinking about resituating the stories within a theater, and sort of pointing at the theatricality of storytelling and, the fiction of storytelling and the way that we make things bigger or smaller, and then it's just the practicality of animation. You can, it dawned on me that a theater set became a way to strip away all of the other stuff that may not be, so it's less render time, it's less model building, it's less so the practicalities of things, the economics of things start to enter in. So once I sort of grasp onto that, the whole nature of a set, and that being mirrored, the absent audience of the theater gets projected into the audience that is here now, witnessing the film, and then I'm also interested in new technology. I'm very much interested in where cinematic language is going, where documentary language may be going, new technologies that we're in the midst of right now that are falling away, that are evaporating. And as we look back at photography and historians have to go and say, oh, actually they had to make these weird devices that would hold people's necks still so that they could take the photograph, and and that stuff becomes language in a photograph. And there's things that are happening now that are slipping away. So I was trying to just work with the technology at a level that I could work with as a way to sort of mark it and anchor it in ways that I don't think are happening. Motion capture is a technology that is about to become ubiquitous in the world. And facial capture is becoming ubiquitous, in this sort of collapse of virtual spaces and the real world, whatever that is, I think we're going to see this insane acceleration over the next 25 years, and we're already seeing it creep into documentary language, but it's the history of photography in general in a way that we've normalized all of this stuff, right?
Because there's so many variants on what is documentary language anyway, and all of it's questionable.
And what is documentary language? And when you start to really look at it, you go why do we give so much faith and truth to this mechanical photograph? And I think that this bizarre thing is going to happen, and we're not going to think it's bizarre, but this stuff that we're dealing with now, this 3D modeling and virtual capture and all of this stuff, is going to become normalized to such a degree, and it's going to speak authentically to us. There is going to be a space where we can imagine it talking with authenticity, but it will speak with authenticity the same way that we take photographs and certain types of documentary constructions as being truth construction. So
now you propose the other elements of the show, and I want to then talk about a couple of those with you, because they bring also other things into play as we watch your film as well. I mean,
Sure.
Zora Neale Hurston's, and you hear, I believe, Alan Lomax's voice, wants to give her to give the evidence and the year she heard it. And then I added the Uncle Ben piece because it had that one note because he had that one little sarcastic comment at the end. It was like,
we got that scientific.
I guess this is what they'll be using the science of recording the
right.
get at after, the semi, risque song. But but to me, there's that element, of course, of what how you described it was how ethnographic recording traditionally is you go out and you record the person who has actually performed it.
Right.
And what Zora Neale Hurston has done has become the intermediary. She learned it from somebody a year or 2 or 5 before, and is now getting around to recording it for somebody else in a different city and so forth. So, I mean, there's the intermediary of her memory and her performance skills and everything else, and her storytelling skills.
Yeah.
And that's a very, I think, interesting addition, but I wanted you to see if you could, is that what interested you for those recordings as well? Are there other elements here that I'm missing, or if you could expound more on that?
Yeah, I had the fortune to read a dissertation by a woman named Rosh Hashanah Keshti, and she's doing she's got a book project coming out about Zora Neale Hurston. And she says that there's other people writing about this aspect of Zora Neale Hurston also. But she was just this amazing woman who was incredibly aware of the power structures as they existed. And she was, sensitive to the ways that the community felt that they couldn't resist. It it would be a big thing for an African American community to say no to Alan Lomax. We're not going to do our song for you, right? It was common that she would say that like Lead Belly had his songs for the ethnographers. When they would show up, he would do certain songs for them, but he would keep over here the good stuff, right? You know, Zora Neale Hurston, Keshti talks about Zora Neale Hurston's anti-ethnographic stance, that she was aware that when she would go out, she would perform the stories as a way of as performing a buffer between the community. So she knew what she was doing. She knew that she was purposely going against ethnographic practices, and it drove the other members of her team crazy that she would do that. But she understood that this was a way of sort of thwarting, intervening in certain kinds of power structures. Yeah, when Keshti turned me on to Zora Neale Hurston in that regard, because I hadn't been aware of, you know, I knew her books, but hadn't known of her heavy anti-ethnographic practice in this regard. I just, sure, you know, it illuminated a certain kind of practice. You know, it was just fantastic to know that I'm not doing anything new by going, you know, let's maybe make a buffer, let's not provide access, let's cause the audience to question why do they want to feel like they had some kind of first-hand experience, that they, you know, they saw something real.
We recently showed Forest of Bliss, which is a classic, like, poetic ethnographic film by Robert Gardner, but it raises this exact question. What some of these questions, but, you know, in a different way. I mean, in a way, you could almost question whether it's possible to have a true ethnographic film, even though these are the films that are, like, held up as being, like, these true documents of how people behaved. But the ways in which the fallacy of that assumption get encoded at every step of the line.
Right.
That's one other thing I had. I want to get right here. Oh, so, I mean, there's another question which is infused in what you're just saying in the power structure, and of course the notion of, like, whose testimony ever gets heard and which is ignored, what are the ways it's moderated, and then, you know, and of course it continues both in whatever in the after effects of Katrina and what happened on the bridge, and African communities being documented by, you know, white, let's say, story recorders, or I don't know what you would call them, myth makers. And then, of course, even today, and, you know, when we have, like, the piece of video that shows how the policeman is telling the lie about how something went down, and so on. And again, it's just like the ongoing playing out of how the power structure and whoever gets to tell the story, you know, gets to control something in the end, many things in the end as well. So let's say, well, at this point we've talked a bit, and any more thoughts or questions from any of you, please? Yes.
When you are making these pieces, are you thinking about your audience? Are you thinking about what you want your audience to take home with them?
I do, of course. And, you know, my difficulty is that I try to create a playground, like what's the right word, but, you know, a space for the audience and myself to invent. And this work has to sustain me for 2, 3, 4 years, and it just, you know, that process of making something that can sustain me, that I can continue to, like, I can still play with it. I can sit and watch it now, and I'm still going, oh, ooh. And so, but I think that can also be difficult. Like, I know that it is a very dense piece, but I also like to try to make things that can withstand repeated viewings. Like, it's not a one-time, you can come back to it again and again. But I definitely think about the audience, and am constantly trying to place myself,
I was struck by, like, in some ways, this was like Laura Mulvey with sound.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Because we keep on going on, and it's actually really amazing because it's this trance that you get into, and you are creating a world with these different that become their own iconic images, as well as sounds and parts of stories, and that was really fascinating. So, and incredibly complex. So yes, I mean, it's almost like it is like a piece that you would come back to again and again and again, which, you know, was really extraordinary.
Oh, thanks. I mean, I definitely struggle with density. and how to, you know, it's hard to know as a maker.
Yeah.
When you're going too far and when you need to pull back, and yeah, just how to read an audience. And
So is that like an issue for experimental film, is how you show your films, and where, like your venues? Because we're in a traditional space right now, in a traditional, even a commercial space, you might say. So I'm just curious if there's discussion also with the FIlmforum, like how you position these films. I'm just curious about that.
well, there's lots of micro cinemas around the country. There's, of course, lots of festivals that cater to experimental work. There's museums, there's galleries. You know, there is a lively community that exists around experimental work. So, you know, it's smaller, of course, but I think that goes for whether it's difficult writing, more complex literature, or music, or
Are you making it for the big screen or small screen? I guess what I'm wondering is that, are there, like, what is your ideal?
You mean like an iPhone or a?
Like, what is your ideal canvas? Because
I love a big screen.
Okay, so when you're
There's something about being able to sit in a theater with sound surrounding you and being able to be immersed.
So when you're making it, really your ideal is this huge screen with this immersive sound system. Like, that would be your ideal.
I think, yeah, I mean, I think about it that way. I think that,
That's interesting.
sure. I mean, it was initially designed as a, what do you call it? Binaural sound. So it's a you know, it was made as a headphone
Ah, right,
piece.
right,
And that's immersive, and
right.
yeah. So,
Yeah, that's interesting.
yeah.
Because, yeah, I mean, there's different ways in which a work like this, and this is an ongoing debate about, you know, how it plays differently if it were to be installed in a gallery or museum, in which the temporal aspect, of course, most of your viewers then aren't going to see it through, and they're not necessarily going to see it through from beginning to ending. So all of those then add their own demands on what is storytelling, or change the nature of what is a story being told.
Right.
If it were, say, like, if you had installed this in a loop and somebody came in and saw minutes 6 through 9,
Right.
you know, dramatically different. So I want to bring up Addie Russell's piece and a
Okay.
couple of other questions.
Sure.
And, like, well, first, again, a slight tangent. How do you like your performance in your piece at this point? Is it actually?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I'm brilliant, but I can suffer through it. And you know, sometimes I just forget. Like, I'm not thinking all the time, oh, that's me, that's me, that's me. I'm more just engaged with the ideas that are transpiring. And
I mean, the first time I saw it, of course, I had no idea what you sounded like,
Uh-huh.
and so it was
where I was hard.
it didn't matter. All the performances and voices and variations were good. They were well performed to me.
Okay.
And now that I know your voice, actually it changed some of the elements of the piece for you, because the first time I saw it, I had no.
Right.
Even though you had written testimony about how you were doing the voice of Noel and so on, but given every other element of construction, of course, that could have just not been true or not.
Right. Sure.
But,
Sure.
you know, again, and this time I knew that that question wasn't that question for me anymore. But bringing up, what interested you in the Addie Russell piece in regards to this? They raised so many interesting questions regarding acting and performance and so on, but is that part of it? And then what other?
I love the way that you constantly are flip-flopping back and forth between your engagement with the text, you know, the interview, and then your, you know, which is the brilliance of her piece, is that you're also constantly engaged with the performance, and she amplifies the performance, right? Down to, I mean, she's brilliant in all of the little facial gestures and everything. It's a fantastic study. I saw the piece at a conference in Sweden, no, in England, and then I just went and I found the original interview. I mean, it's on. You can find it on YouTube. And so you can see what she did, how she edited, changed, remixed it in slight ways to push things, and then you can also see it's Shoshani's her Oscar, you know, to go up, and you know, so you get this expanded historical picture of the event, which is, you know, I would suggest everybody sort of go back and look at the full picture. Yeah,
if any of you are not familiar with that, it was that Marlon Brando won Best Actor for Godfather, or was it for Last Tango? I think it was The Godfather. But when he won, he didn't go up himself, but he sent up this Native American woman to give the speech in his place, which was sort of booed and then cut off, and so forth.
Right, and then she's voicing his words, right, which is another sort of remove in the process. So she's being, you know, her body is presenting her, you know, so there's this constant enfolding that's happening. And then I like the thing which is part of animated documentaries now, which is, to qualify as a documentary, it's the voice that becomes the anchor. Right.
That's the source of the verisimilitude, yeah.
Yes, right. So then people go, okay, I have the voice, I'm safe. And what's the name of that film? I'll remember it. But it's a common strategy, and you know, so I like the way that you get that, and the way that Adele is playing with it and using it to bring forth, you know, just practices that are out there. And I have a hard time. It's an uncanny, you know. It's when you're watching it, you don't quite understand what it is that's happening to you, and I haven't verbalized for myself in a productive way what it is that I'm flip-flopping back and forth between. But there is this curious thing that when you're watching her face and her expression and the lip sync and all of these things that are transpiring, yeah, maybe somebody else here has a description of what it is that is happening. Yeah.
Well, one element I think is this kind of appreciation of the material. You feel like she's reenacting it because she's just fascinating with it.
Yes.
And you feel that, you know. I mean, also in your piece, there's a sense of the value of this person, or the people that are speaking, and that you have the voice of, the words of.
Sure. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I wanted to say something back to about your film. I found it incredibly liberating and freeing for me to, because you used animation and not actors, and there weren't the actual people. Because I tend to judge people.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I'll judge the actors and their performance,
Yes.
and I'll judge people, even in a documentary, that he's this kind of person,
Yes.
or she's that. You freed me from that, which I believe for me, because you used animation, I listened. I didn't have that judgment.
Yeah.
I could just listen to what you were telling me. And moreover, the sound was one of the first things I noticed, with some footsteps that you start right at the beginning. The sound was beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
I don't know. Right at the beginning, there's footsteps or something. It was freeing for me, and I listened more because I didn't have all these other judgments that I tend to have about people when I see human people on a screen. So that was amazing. for me.
Yeah, I thank you. I agree with that. I think that is one of those, because it's all of this other distractions, and if you could just focus on the content.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
It's like that element, I mean, just in all the films today. Like if you're watching Dick Cavett and Marlon Brando themselves, and these are the words coming out of their mouth, you don't actually investigate it closer. But once you've separated either element, then your mind gets freed, because then you realize the artificiality of either or both being assigned to each other, and how they're both manipulatable.
Right. Yes.
I wonder if you could talk a bit about, I mean, we talked about the Zora Neale Hurston and yours and like conventional or power structures, but I wonder if the Addie Russell piece also can be said to investigate that in some way, because it's not, obviously it's not the more obvious like African American situations and so forth, but still there's a valorization of a particular power in the way that information is conveyed. I mean, Marlon Brando's specifically questioning some of these, which is, of course, one of the remarkable things about the interview,
Right.
that he would say some of these things on TV. But I want to see if you have more to say about that.
No, I think you put your finger on it exactly. I mean, it's his gesture, it's his initial gesture, and her amplification of his initial gestures, which is to call into question, what is being sold, what's being marketed, why does he have to do this foolish stuff on television? And I love that at the very end of the interview, he comes back and he raises what he's there to do and talk about, and that all of this other stuff was necessary, this wasting of time. So in that respect, certainly we come back to the core. Yeah, I think that without a doubt that her work is, not all of it, but that piece in particular is all about the power of the image and how it is used.
The other thing is about the power of gender.
The power of gender.
Gender.
Yes.
Or the not powerful woman. That to me that was what was really fascinating, because they were women that were playing men or embodying men, and their physicality was so not feminine in the way that they embodied Dick Cavett and Marlon Brando. And that was fascinating to me, that it was also a real look at gender.
I know, exactly.
And that to me was really fascinating, and about power, because you couldn't get a woman to probably do the same thing that Marlon Brando did, because she would have been crazier than Marlon Brando. And what was also interesting is Marlon Brando didn't seem crazy. He seemed really smart. But it was.
You think it would have been the other way?
It was really fascinating, because you listen to him more because it's this woman, and we're separated from him because we've endowed some of his actions as being kind of wacky, but he was really brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that was really what stood out. So this whole assumptions are stripped away as well. That's what was amazing to me. Yeah, the gender issue is just
Huge.
enormous.
Yeah.
And for ownerBuilt, also, there's still also the fundamental question in a way of seeing it, whether it's as a document or whether it conveys to an audience then. Should we continue to raise the question of what is the truth of what happened on the bridge after the hurricane and so forth? And we can comprehend that despite all the distancings of image and sound, it still has that effect upon us of then questioning the story that has been told to us and the events as conveyed or, as previously understood. So, that's, to me, it's like after removing all the normal attachments for verisimilitude, it still has the power of, say, what a normal documentary could do just by conveying facts in a more conventional way. Or do you think that's...
You're saying that it at times conveys facts in a conventional way, or?
No, I'm saying that if you were to have like the documentary that
Mhm.
wishes to give us insight that we didn't know otherwise,
Mhm.
by conveying facts in the normal way and having the investigative reporter or whatnot, but yours by actually removing all the normal ways that fact or verisimilitude is carried, still has that effect in some ways, because we still are led to question the story of what we've heard of what happened on the bridge. We are still led with wanting to know more about the people who are actually there, are led to think we now know some elements more about the people who are there,
Right.
or not, that the distancing mechanisms still lead to some desire for sympathy in some way.
Mm. Sure. Yeah. No, I think that. I mean, I guess.
Or does it? I mean, for you.
I guess truth always has to be tested. That's what I would just say, and it's always. I mean, I think that there's a philosopher named Jacques Rancière, and he says that documentary is one of the most sort of interesting and inventive spaces. Is because of the fact that it is this place where reality gets debated, and. I mean, that's just our responsibility, and we give up that responsibility a lot of time. We give certain kinds of text authority, and form is interesting in that way, right? And why does certain kind of formal structures speak with authority? And we should. This is why I'm always drawn to it, and I have to work this way. Is that I'm always trying to test those formal structures and take them apart and see what happens and try to learn something about the language that we speak in and use to construct truth with, and what happens when you twist that language around and reconfigure it. Does it open up another way of seeing something? Because I mean, language is what we use to understand the world, and we don't think about the structure. A PBS documentary structure is being. I don't think the average person thinks of it as being language. That structure. We just. When things get normalized, it's hard to see them for what they are. And so I guess that's why I try to take it apart and come at it in a different way, that hopefully we can question those structures. Yeah.
Wonderful. Any other thoughts or questions from any of you? Because that's also a wonderful place to wrap up for the evening. But anything else? Thank you very much for.
Well, thank you all for coming.